In the first days of Operation Barbarossa, over 3.8 million personnel of the Axis powers, the largest invasion force in the history of warfare, invaded the Soviet Union along a 3,000-kilometer front with more than 600,000 motor vehicles. After the initial shock, the Soviet Union could concentrate its forces against Germany thanks to a 1941 neutrality pact with its longtime rival, the Japanese Empire. This became painfully obvious to Hitler during the 1941 Battle of Moscow, when the Red Army's well-trained and well-equipped Siberian divisions reinforced the battered Soviet armies defending Moscow. Trained to operate in the harsh cold of Siberia, these fresh troops shattered the frozen German spearheads at the gates of the Soviet capital. But what if the Soviet Union had faced a two-front war? What would have happened if Japan had attacked the Soviet Union in 1941 or in 1942? Well, the traditional narrative is that in the middle of 1941, the Japanese leaders were split between the Imperial Army, which wanted to attack the Soviet Union, and the Navy, which pressed for seizing the resources of Southeast Asia. In the fall of 1941, with the German armies approaching Moscow, Japanese leaders made the fateful decision to declare war against the Western powers. Stalin learned from Richard Zorge, a well-placed Soviet spy in Tokyo, that Japan would not invade Siberia, which led the Soviet dictator to shift his elite Siberian troops from the Far East to Moscow just in time to save the Soviet capital. But what would have happened if Japan had attacked Stalin's empire from the east, while Germany advanced from the west? Would it have changed the course of World War II? First, let's see some facts. Russia had been defeated in the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 and 5 and placed a Japanese army in the region. The Kwantung Army, formed in 1906, expanded into an army group during the interwar period to support Japanese interests in China, Manchuria, and Mongolia. The Kwantung Army became the most prestigious command in the Imperial Japanese Army, and many of its personnel won promotion to high positions in the Japanese military and civil government. Although the Kwantung Army was nominally subordinate to the Imperial General Headquarters located in Tokyo, its leadership very often acted in direct violation of the orders from mainland Japan without suffering any consequences. During the intervention in the Russian Civil War, Japanese troops had actually advanced all the way to Lake Baikal. Although the Japanese troops later withdrew, a political and military doctrine was born, the Hokushin-ron, or Northern Expansion Doctrine. It stated that Manchuria and Siberia were Japan's sphere of interest, and that the potential value to Japan for economic and territorial expansion in those areas was greater than elsewhere. It enjoyed wide support within the Imperial Japanese Army during the interwar period, but was abandoned in 1939 after the military defeat on the Mongolian front at the battles of Khalkhin Gol and the signing of the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact in 1941. After concluding the non-aggression treaty, Stalin, in an unprecedented gesture, saw Japanese Foreign Minister Yosuke Matsuoka off at the train station. That was symbolic of the importance that Stalin, who rarely appeared before foreign diplomats, attached to the treaty. Hokushinron was superseded by the rival policy Nanshinron, or the Southern Expansion Doctrine, which regarded Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands as Japan's political and economic sphere of influence, and aimed to acquire the resources of European colonies and to neutralize the threat of Western military forces in the Pacific. Nevertheless, the Kwantung Army was heavily augmented over the next few years, up to the strength of 700,000 troops by 1941. So the Imperial Japanese Army in the region was battle-hardened and not yet worn down by the China War. It could move fast, fight just as fanatically as Soviet troops, and was skilled in infiltration tactics and night fighting. So let's see the consequences of a Japanese attack against the Soviet Union in late 1941. The Kwantung Army would have enjoyed powerful air and naval support. The Imperial Japanese Navy could have employed naval gunfire and its Zero fighter squadrons to ensure air superiority for a drive on the vital port of Vladivostok. The Soviet Siberian troops were good, but in 1941 they were at the end of a very long supply line from Western Russia that would have been disrupted by the German capture of resources. Given a choice between retaining Moscow or Vladivostok, Stalin would have prioritized defending the Soviet capital, so Japan might have taken Vladivostok and the Siberian coast without too much effort. Ironically, the battlefield results of a Japanese invasion of Siberia would have been relatively minor, but the Soviet Union would have lost the vital port city of Vladivostok and much of the American land-lease supplies that came through that port within a few weeks. The real action was a continent away in Moscow. The Japanese attack would have dramatically affected the Battle of Moscow as well. The German armies in front of the capital were depleted, exhausted, and freezing. Yet many of the Soviet armies at Moscow were hastily thrown together, inexperienced, poorly led, and still struggling to regain their balance from the German onslaught. It seems likely that the Soviet counteroffensive would have thrown back Hitler's armies without the Siberian forces, but would have inflicted much less damage. So the real impact might have been in 1942. With the loss of the majority of the land-lease supplies, the Red Army would have been forced to give up the Caucasus oil fields, and Stalin would have been forced to sign a peace treaty in late 1942. Then, Germany and Japan could have concentrated on common enemy number 2 and 3, Great Britain and the United States. Well, this is only a scenario, but it is possible that if the Germans had won the Battle of Stalingrad, Japan would have invaded Siberia. General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya, who led the Japanese forces during the invasion of Malaya and the Battle of Singapore, was sent to Manchuria in July of 1942 and tasked with organizing the Japanese troops for a possible invasion. Some have suggested that he may have been sent there to prepare for an attack upon the Soviet Union according to the earlier Hokushin-Ron plans. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and to make sure you don't miss my future work, please make sure you are subscribed to my channel and press the bell notification button. Thank you, and see you in the next video.